On the evening of Saturday, June 21, 2025, President Donald J. Trump made a dramatic return to the White House. His helicopter, Marine One, touched down on the South Lawn just after 6 p.m. under a sky that seemed to hold its breath. He had been at his golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey for a brief respite, but the calm of the manicured fairways was a world away from the crisis brewing in Washington and the Middle East. His return was not a routine end to a weekend getaway. It was the prelude to a momentous decision that would reverberate across the globe. A small group of aides waited for him, their faces grim, a silent acknowledgement of the gravity of the hours ahead. The president descended the steps of Marine One with a determined look, foregoing his usual wave to the cameras. He walked with a swift, purposeful stride directly toward the West Wing, bypassing the usual pleasantries. This was a man with a singular focus, driven by a sense of urgency that had been building for days. His advisors, including Vice President J.D. Vance and his special envoy Steve Witkoff, fell in step behind him. The air was thick with unspoken tension. The world was watching, waiting to see what the American president would do next in response to Iran's escalating conflict with Israel and its defiant nuclear ambitions. His every move was now part of a high-stakes geopolitical drama. Immediately upon entering the Oval Office, Mr. Trump was ushered into a critical national security briefing. The Situation Room was already assembled, a collection of the nation's top military and intelligence officials ready to present the final options. The meeting was the culmination of days of intense planning and intelligence gathering. The president was presented with detailed assessments of Iranian capabilities and the potential outcomes of military action. The atmosphere was charged, a mix of strategic calculation and historical weight. This was the moment where deliberation would end and a decision, with all its irreversible consequences, would be made. The weight of this choice was palpable in the room. The purpose of this urgent gathering was clear: to authorize a direct military response to what the administration viewed as an imminent threat from Iran. For days, the president had been signaling his impatience both publicly and privately. He believed that Iran's pursuit of a nuclear weapon, combined with its aggression toward Israel, had crossed a red line that could no longer be ignored. After listening to the final briefings from his generals and advisors, the president gave the order. The decision was made. The United States would launch preemptive airstrikes against key Iranian nuclear facilities, a move that would fundamentally alter the landscape of the Middle East and define his presidency. The stage for this confrontation had been set just days earlier at the G7 summit in Kananaskis, Alberta. President Trump had cut his trip short, a clear sign that his focus was shifting entirely to the Middle East. He had left the gathering of world leaders on June 17th, stating a need to achieve a real end to Iran's nuclear program. The G7 leaders, including Canada's Mark Carney and Britain's Keir Starmer, had issued a joint statement affirming Israel's right to self-defense. They labeled Iran the principal source of regional instability and collectively insisted that Tehran can never have a nuclear weapon. This unified stance provided a backdrop of international, if cautious, support for a tougher line against Iran. The crisis had been rapidly escalating since June 12th, when Israel launched its own series of attacks on Iranian soil. Israeli forces targeted missile sites, munitions storage facilities, and the critical nuclear facility at Natanz. These strikes were not just punitive, they were strategic. Reports suggested that some attacks in southern Iran were designed to clear flight paths for a potential American operation. Israel also succeeded in killing several senior Iranian commanders, including Mohammad Saeed-Izadi of the elite Quds Force. This direct and sustained Israeli military campaign dramatically raised the stakes, pushing the region closer to an all-out war and forcing President Trump's hand. Iran's response was one of defiance and retaliation. Its new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, vowed to strike back hard against Israel, even as he left a small window open for talks. Iran fired ballistic missiles toward Israel, demonstrating its capability and willingness to escalate. Meanwhile, its supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, reportedly retreated to a secure bunker, a sign of how seriously the regime was taking the threat of a wider conflict. The Iranian government imposed internet blackouts to control information and warned that anyone caught collaborating with its enemies would face execution. The regime was preparing its people for a fight, framing the conflict as a defense of national sovereignty against foreign aggression. The tension rippled throughout the Middle East, creating widespread anxiety. the Iranian-backed Houthi militia in Yemen threatened to attack U.S. ships in the Red Sea, aiming to disrupt global trade and expand the conflict. Neighboring Gulf states, caught between the United States and Iran, expressed grave concerns to the International Atomic Energy Agency about the safety of regional nuclear facilities. The entire region was on edge, fearing that a direct U.S.-Iran conflict could ignite a catastrophic war that would spare no one. The careful balance of power that had existed for decades was now on the verge of shattering completely, with unpredictable consequences for all. Following the national security meeting, the United States military machine moved with swift precision. The Pentagon had already positioned its most formidable assets, B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, capable of carrying massive 30,000-pound bunker-buster bombs designed to penetrate deep underground facilities, were moved from their base in Missouri and deployed to the region. They were joined by an overwhelming force of F-22, F-16, and F-35 fighter jets, creating an umbrella of air superiority over the Middle East. This massive buildup was a clear and unambiguous signal of intent. President Trump had warned Iran just days before, stating, "If they do anything to our people, we'll come down so hard. Then the gloves are off so beautifully." The order was executed under the cover of darkness. In a stunning announcement made via his Truth Social platform, President Trump declared that the United States had launched direct airstrikes on Iranian territory. He confirmed that a full payload of bombs had been dropped on 3 of Iran's most important nuclear sites. Media Group, satellite images of Fordo facility, aerial view of Natanz nuclear plant, Isfahan nuclear site exterior at distribute_equally, the heavily fortified Fordo facility, the main enrichment plant at Natanz, and a third facility near the city of Isfahan. He added that all American planes had exited Iranian airspace safely, a detail meant to underscore the technological superiority of the U.S. military. This was the first direct American attack on Iranian soil since the 1979 revolution, a historic and deeply provocative act. The strikes were officially framed as a preemptive act of war. The administration's justification was that the action was necessary to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, which it argued posed an existential threat to both Israel and American interests in the region. By targeting the core of Iran's nuclear program, the White House aimed to cripple its capabilities for years to come. The decision represented a monumental gamble, betting that a swift, decisive blow would deter further aggression and force Iran to abandon its nuclear ambitions. However, it also opened the door to a wider, more violent conflict that could easily spiral out of control. In the immediate aftermath, the focus shifted to the safety of American citizens. The U.S. State Department initiated emergency evacuations for Americans in Israel, recognizing the high probability of Iranian retaliation against the closest U.S. ally. Evacuations were organized by sea and air, a frantic effort to move civilians out of a potential war zone. Simultaneously, casualty reports began to emerge from Iran. The country's health ministry stated that over 400 Iranians had been killed and more than 3,000 wounded since the start of the Israeli attacks, numbers that were certain to rise following the U.S. strikes. The human cost of the conflict was already becoming tragically clear. The American airstrikes on Iran sent shockwaves through global markets and diplomatic channels. The price of oil surged overnight as traders braced for major disruptions to shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, a critical artery for the world's energy supply. International allies, while publicly supportive of containing Iran's nuclear program at the G7, were privately anxious about the sudden escalation. Leaders like France's Emmanuel Macron and Germany's Friedrich Merz now faced the difficult task of preventing a regional conflict from turning into a global one. The world was suddenly a more dangerous place, with the old rules of engagement torn apart by America's bold and unilateral action. For the United States, President Trump's decision marked a defining moment of his presidency. It was a fulfillment of his America First doctrine, demonstrating a willingness to use military force to protect national interests without seeking broad international consensus. His supporters hailed the move as a show of strength and resolve, a necessary action to neutralize a hostile regime. Critics, however, warned that he had plunged the nation into a new, unwinnable war in the Middle East, one that could cost countless lives and trillions of dollars. The decision deeply divided the country, reigniting fierce debates about the role of America in the world and the limits of presidential power. The long-term consequences of this preemptive war are yet to be seen. Iran, though battered, is unlikely to capitulate. A military response, whether through its own forces or its proxies like Hezbollah and the Houthis, seems almost certain. This could lead to a prolonged and bloody conflict that destabilizes the entire region, threatening U.S. troops stationed there and jeopardizing the security of key allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia. The strikes may have set back Iran's nuclear program, but they may have also strengthened the resolve of its hardliners to acquire a bomb as the ultimate deterrent against future attacks. For American readers, this event is of profound importance. It is a stark reminder that decisions made in the White House have immediate and far-reaching consequences, both at home and abroad. The conflict with Iran will likely dominate the national conversation, affecting everything from gas prices to the federal budget and the safety of American service members. The dramatic events of June 21, 2025, have set the United States on a new and uncertain path. The nation now stands at the center of a historic crisis, and its citizens must grapple with the reality of a war that was chosen in a single evening, but whose impact will be felt for years to come.